When should someone consider adding carbohydrates back to their diet? No, this is actually not a clickbait title. You may have actually heard me on my channel before say, depending on who you are, maybe up to 20 grams of carbohydrates would be indicated for you to consume. However, people wonder, how do I know if I'm one of those people? In fact, I've gotten multiple comments that are like that. The short answer is this is basically inferred after you've tried basically every other suggested amelioration tactic for things like electrolyte wasting, for things like thyroid hormone disruption or dysfunction, maybe, in terms of lack of sufficient production of them or lack of sufficient thyroid activity, which will be inferred based on your symptoms. And that then leads to a subsequent question, which is, okay, what are those amelioration methods? I've talked about this ad nauseum on my channel. I've talked about a lack of a sufficient bolus of protein consumed for your physiological needs because of the fact that stimulates insulin, and insulin causes sodium retention. We obviously know that. It has an effect on a transporter on the kidneys that's involved in retaining, at the very least, sodium, or things like actually supplementing with electrolytes if you think that you're not deriving enough from your food. We do live in a modern world today, and so supplementing with electrolytes may actually be indicated for some people if you don't derive enough from your food, which we would have done ancestrally speaking. Those are the two main things. If you've approached that appropriately, and this is all within the context of assuming that you've transitioned to the diet over 6 to 8 weeks slowly, which of course, for multiple reasons other than the microbiome, such as this one, is very important to do, then perhaps consider up to 20 grams of carbohydrates. Now, the justification for this, because people might be wondering, Eddie, you talk on your channel about how carbohydrates are not required for human consumption. However, we all speak in generalizations in order to be simplistic. In order to be efficient is really the better word to use. We have been eating plants in a relatively significant amount for 13,000, perhaps up to 50,000 years. Now, according to the Darwinian principles of evolution, within that 50,000 to 13,000 year timeline, we could have had certain pressures exerted, depending on who you are, depending on what your ancestral lineage is, on certain genes, genotypes, that have made them less efficient at engaging in gluconeogenesis for glucose demands as other people. This is absolutely a possibility. And if that's the case, you may very well require 20 grams of carbohydrates a day. I don't think that there's exactly an indication for 50, but if there is an absolute maximum, it would be 50 grams. But 20 grams is typically what I recommend people try if they've tried everything else. And here's the thing. There's going to be, I think, a few people that think that this is blasphemous. This is a slippery slope as well. Oh, you're turning into Paul Saladino 2.0. I highly doubt that's the case. I highly, highly doubt that in terms of the second claim. In fact, I know for a fact that's not the case. However, it's completely consistent with my viewpoint. The principles of evolutionary indication. We very well could have had a pressure to consume 20 grams of carbohydrates. Perhaps, if you're going to try and assess and infer what form we derived those in, you could think perhaps milk. We could think from A2 grass-fed, non-pasteurized sources, as we know. Perhaps some honey, depending on where we evolved from. It's not a regular thing where you can get honey all the time, so don't listen to people that say that, etc. Those are the two primary sources that I would think that we would be deriving them from. In the agricultural revolution, we also started to cultivate other plants, so perhaps we derived some from grains. We definitely derived some from grains, actually, yes. One of which being rice, one of which being wheat. It doesn't matter. Maybe even sourdough bread at one point. We did consume that as sort of a staple food at one point. Either way, I think that it's absolutely consistent with my ideology, with the facts, actually. However, there is a reason that my general rule is that you shouldn't consume any to speak of. It's because the vast majority of us do not require it. This is a fact, okay? So, before any of you freak out about me being, oh, you're going soft, Eddie, you're going soft. No, I'm not. This is completely consistent with my viewpoint. In fact, 20 is still pretty low. We get lost in the weeds quite a bit whenever you get further and further into a carnivore space for longer and longer periods of time. For a normal person, 20 grams of carbohydrates is incredibly low, incomprehensibly low. So, it's all relative to perspective and all that, but I thought I'd clear this up, make a video about it, and I hope this was informative. I hope this made sense. And join me next time when we react to more juvenility and erroneousness. Till then.